What difference have women made in society? How have they affected you? Believe it or not, none of that difference would have been possible if it weren't for the brave women who met to make a change on July 19th in Seneca Falls, New York. They met to change the social standards for women in the United States. These women wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, a document based on the Declaration of Independence, freeing women from the social bonds that they are imprisoned with. The drawing, Politics is No Place for Women, by Lou Rogers, describes the bonds created by society restricting women. Women during the 19th century were thought of as property. Very rarely did you find a man who would treat a woman the same as they would treat another man. The American society was based on the unequal treatment of women. The kinds of job women were suited for were a housewife, maid, or seamstress. Not many other jobs were offered at this time. Man was supreme and women were subservience. Difficulties were to be expected, and life was full of hard work and no fun for women. The average worker woman's day started before the sun rose and ended hours after the children went to bed. Up at the crack of dawn and cooking breakfast, the woman would be multitasking, taking care of the children and the men. Once the man was out and earning the money, the woman would begin housekeeping. This included taking care of the children, making or preparing food, and cleaning the house. This was all hard labor that the women had to do every single day. During this time, men set out to ensure that women never got outside their set jobs. The jobs women had were described for them by men. Now, isn't there an issue there? Men thought of women as meek, subservient, and only good for domestic jobs. The domestic jobs included child rearing, washing, cooking, and cleaning the house, as well as taking care of the men of the house. Factory work was an avenue that women could follow in their pursuit of equality that was open to them during the 1840s. This option was opened to women and empowered them to realize that they could do the same work as men. Being paid only a half or two-thirds of what men were, the women began to form societies that would try and better their working condition. Men thought they were pretty clever in setting these ground rules, but in fact, the women took the traditions set for them by men and turned them into the weapon they needed to break free from the subservient situation they found themselves in. Women argued that if they were supposed to only be good at taking care of domestic things, like the children, then they would make society their children and help lead them in the correct direction. This cartoon was against women's suffrage movements, describing the mother goose as hatching trouble in society. Domesticity was a title used by men to help describe the life of women during the 1800s. The domesticity that men created bound women to a society that punished them for being who they were, women. In the theory of domesticity, men said that women were only able to take care of the house, children, and were not able to participate in politics, for it was much too complicated for them to understand. Their place was in the house and not in society. The Quakers had a huge influence on the making of the Declaration of Sentiments. Their morals allowed for men and women to work equally in society. Two very noted Quakers were Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott. The Quaker ministers, some of whom were women, helped start abolitionist movements that were the precursors to women's rights movements.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton met Lucretia Mott at the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. At this convention, women were refused seating simply because of their gender. On their way home from England, Mott and Stanton began to form ideas of starting a convention of their own, but this time for women's rights. Elizabeth Stanton and a group of female Quakers, including Lucretia Mott, came together to plan the convention on July 9th. The convention was organized by the ladies pictured from left to right: Elizabeth Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Martha Coffin Wright, Mary Ann McClintock, and Jane Hunt.
The advertisement for the convention was put out on July 11th, giving just 8 days' notice, and described the convention to be a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women.
On July 16th, a smaller group of women met, including Mary Ann McClintock, her eldest daughters, and Elizabeth Stanton. During this small meeting, the women voiced their concerns and created resolutions for them. They then created the Declaration of Sentiments, which was based off the Declaration of Independence. Over the next 4 days, Elizabeth Stanton edited the document herself with the help of her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, who was a lawyer and a politician. Henry did not approve of Elizabeth's idea to add women's suffrage onto the Declaration, and since he wanted to run for elective office, he left Seneca Falls so he would not be associated with such an unpopular cause. After all of the hard work and planning of the convention, it finally came together on July 19, 1848, just 10 days after its initial planning. The fight for women's suffrage was about to gain its lead. On the day of the convention, everyone gathered in front of Wesleyan Chapel, which turned out to be locked. To solve this, Elizabeth Stanton's nephew was lifted through the window to unbar the doors from the inside. Although day one was meant specifically for women, about 40 men showed up. The men were not turned away, but were asked to remain silent during the convention. Mary Ann McClintock became the secretary of the convention, and Elizabeth was to open the convention. She addressed the audience by saying that women needed to accept responsibility for her own life and understand the height, depth, length, and breadth of her own degradation. There were 3 sessions for each day of the convention: morning, afternoon, and evening. The convention started precisely at 11 o'clock in the morning with Elizabeth's address to the audience. Next, Lucretia Mott, who was well known as a beautiful public speaker, spoke to help encourage everyone to fight for women's rights. After Mott's address to the audience, Stanton read the entire Declaration of Sentiments through once. It was then read again, paragraph by paragraph, so that they could go through and fully understand what each resolution meant, and discuss the topics along with adding changes to the document. The Declaration of Sentiments was described as a document that demanded women have equality in family, education, jobs, religion, and morals. One of the resolutions states, "He has withheld her from rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners." This resolution states that women had less rights at the time than black men. This was a huge issue at the time because free black men had very little rights in the 1840s. As seen in this drawing, entitled "The Sky Is" by Everett, the girl is below slavery on the long ladder to women's equality. Another point of the Declaration of Sentiments said that man has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. In simpler terms, by marrying, a woman would lose all her rights, including property rights and other various rights. This drawing represents the loss of women's rights to men. At 2:30 p.m., the first session of the Seneca Falls Convention ended, and led way into the next session. Again, Stanton and Mott addressed the audience to begin the afternoon session. Once again, the Declaration was read, and all of the 11 resolutions were discussed. After this, Lucretia Mott read a piece written by her sister, Martha Wright. This was described as a humorous newspaper piece, which questioned why women had to complete all of their daily tasks that men did not have to do, and still be the one of whom written advice was so lavishly bestowed. Lastly, Elizabeth McClintock delivered a speech, and with that, the first day of the Seneca Falls Convention closed. The second day was held on July 20th, and more people attended, specifically men. The Declaration of Sentiments was read again, and then Assemblyman Ansel Baxham spoke about the passing of the Married Women's Property Act in New York. This act stated that a married woman in New York would now have her own income and property, and that which belonged to her would not instantly become her husband's property, but would remain her own. Further discussion of the Declaration continued until it was finally adopted unanimously. At first, there was question to whether men should sign the document, but it was resolved by forming 2 separate columns. The women's signatures were to be on top, the men's below. A total of 100 people signed it, with 68 being women and 32 men. After that, the morning session ended and once again led into an afternoon session. The Declaration was read yet another time and voted upon. A controversy came up about the women's suffrage resolution, and while many people thought it should be taken off, Frederick Douglass stood and said that he would not accept the right to vote as a black man if women did not have the same right. Then the resolution passed with a large majority and Lucretia Mott adjourned the afternoon session. Finally, the last session of the last day of the convention came. An important part of this session was the reading of Sir William Blackstone's laws. Sir William Blackstone was a commentary on the English laws. His commentaries greatly impacted the original 13 colonies and later the rest of the United States. He was not an advocate for women's rights, and by reading his laws, women were reminded of their current place in society and of their servitude to men. A few more advocates gave some moving speeches, including Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott, and Mary Ann McClintock. After this, the Seneca Falls Convention was over, and with that, it started to pave the long road towards equality for women.
History was about to change forever. Through the hard work and dedication of a couple of strong-willed women in the United States changed forever. The Declaration of Sentiments, based on the Declaration of Independence, set the basis for the convention, giving rise to the ideas of women's suffrage, women's rights, and the spread of the Married Property Act. The religious background of the women who were mostly Quaker helped mold the Declaration of Sentiments. Then, the daring fact that women actually started a movement for women's rights all set the wheels in motion for change. The Seneca Falls Convention impacted the world today by challenging society with change. Not just political, but social change, one that would shake the world over. Women were willing and able to take a full part in society, and through the brave acts of the women who, from humble backgrounds, decided they had had enough, changed the world.